Just to get us started off, wanted to do just sort of a quick visioning exercise with you all. We're talking about safe streets today, but wanted to ask just by asking a pretty simple question. You know, we can't talk about safe streets before we really understand what streets are. And wrapped up in all of this is a notion that people have different opinions. So I want you to take just a quick moment and think to yourself, like, what are streets for? What do you think streets are actually for? What's the purpose of them? How should they be used? Think about that just for a moment. And then I suppose if you'd like to share, go ahead, since there are so few of us, you can go ahead and just, blurt out what you think. We can go in order if you like, or just wait for a pause.
I always say streets are just for people. Just like that simple.
Love it.
I think streets are for providing simple connections for people to get from one place to another.
Okay, so sort of the activity that happens on a street, connecting people together, getting people where they need to go. All right. Any other ideas?
So I would say they're not for parking cars. But anyway, I would say streets are for moving everybody. Right? Should move people, move bikes, move buses, move everything else. In the chat, I'll put in what I've always been told, that they were paved for bikes. So by the American Wheelmen's Association, I was always told that. So that wasn't quite your question, but if someone asked me about it, I'm like, you know what? The roads are here because really we're here. I never want to have a fight with somebody, but I do appreciate being able to use the road as everyone else should use it in a safe manner, hopefully.
Absolutely. What about I think a question for now. You mentioned parking. Some folks will say, well, sure, streets are for parking cars. That's what they're for. You see asphalt, that's for parking a car. A lot of people, especially, if you ask a planner, they'll say, well, they're for commuting. They're for moving people in and out of our job centers, right? That's what streets are for. I think you all probably, everyone who spoke up may agree with, what about playing? Are they for playing ball? Are they for hanging out? Are they for recreation? Okay, a similar question. Who are they for? Might be a very similar answer, but again, helpful to think about it. Think about how you answer this. Maybe think about how someone might disagree with you would answer this question. And again, feel free to blurt out any ideas you might have.
Well, I'd say it should be for everyone. Again, we should be in the right place on the road. Not walking, unless it's open streets, we should be walking down the middle of the street. Ideally, I think everyone should be able to use the roads and then use them properly, safely.
Yep. Are they, obviously there are folks who would say, well, they're for drivers. They're for pedestrians. Some people might have, has anyone ever heard like, well, they're for taxpayers? They're for, I think today, nowadays, we may even be saying that streets are for diners, for enabling business, for enabling us to get back to normal. I'm kind of belaboring the point here, but that I think it's important to recognize that not everyone necessarily agrees on that. And there's a lot of assumptions there. I think the folks in this room may agree on a lot of things, but different assumptions behind each of those questions. Okay, so now, getting to the real issue or the crux of the issue, what does a safe street look like? It's almost a shorthand for a lot of folks when we talk about streets that are better for walking, streets that are better for biking. But like, if you picture in your mind, what's your prototypical safe street? Would anyone care to jump in and describe what that might look like?
Well, for one thing, vehicles that are on the street would not be going so fast that you worry whether they see you or whether the wake from their, passing by is going to knock you over.
Great. So there's a speed element to it, or a difference in speed element.
I think a safe street also looks inviting for people. Like, it's not scary or intimidating, which I think a lot of streets right now that are cut through use or something, and they're not really for the residents that live there, are scary, especially for kids. You're always told, like, don't cross the street, unless unless your parents with you, or, something like that. And so to me, a safe street looks a little bit more inviting.
Absolutely. A safe street is welcoming, not just to one type of use. Absolutely.
Yeah. What I was gonna say was that that it's scaled to the surroundings, or scaled to its situation. That, having a street where there's 3 inches of sidewalk on either side and a whole lot of driving space in between doesn't feel terribly safe, and having a driving lane that's especially narrow can feel unsafe in a lot of situations as well. So having it fit the context, I think, is a big piece of it.
Yeah. It shouldn't surprise anyone that there's, this is a whole field of study, and people get degrees on planning and designing great inviting safe streets. This is kind of one of those things of, well, you know it when you see it. It passes that sniff test of, sure, this is safe, this is not. So obviously I'm belaboring the point here, but depending on who you ask, they're going to have sort of an ingrained assumption about what streets are for, who they're for, what they should look like, how they should function. And that's based on their values. Maybe that's based on their lifestyle, their experience that they've had so far. If for a lot of folks, if you ever take like a vacation to a small European city, it's like an eye opener, because it's like, well, I didn't even know that streets could be like this, because that experience challenges their assumptions of how cities or how streets can work. So much of that is wrapped up in even identity, but especially when we're trying to communicate about it, it's wrapped up in the words that we use. Now, of course, I think we started off with the answer that I think is correct, although it's not about being correct. Streets are for people. This is a photo from last year, a very different time. This is Georgia Avenue in DC. Had an open streets day where miles of this, what is usually a car full street, was closed to cars and open up to people, and you had little tykes rolling around on bikes, and it was lovely. This isn't every day, but I think this was a possibility of what streets could be. So this is kind of, one way that it could be, and I think in many ways this is it's a goal that we have. So safe streets, and actually in this context, on a normal day, everything about this street would be telling a parent and their kid, this is not a safe place to be, but you change the context slightly and suddenly it is. So why is this all important? Well, we know, just looking, this is a chart that we use very often, trying to illustrate sort of when we talk about getting more people biking, when we talk about the people who are biking today, there is a pretty clear breakdown of who is interested and what is, what's governing whether or not they'll hop on a bike. In DC today, which leads the Washington region in terms of biking, and all the other communities around DC are a bit lower. We have about 5% of people who are consistently biking to work and biking for other reasons. But what we know about human behavior is that stress is a huge determiner of whether or not you're going to think about biking. And while there are some folks, 4 to 7%, who will basically hop on a bike on any street that you give them, most folks are not like that way. So I see this two different ways. One is that we're just touching the tip of the iceberg of who might be interested in getting on a bike, for more trips to the store, to school, to work. But we have to do a lot to change the streets around us to make people feel welcome. So, potentially 60% of people would hop on a bike, but they're not going to do it as things are now. So we really have to change the streets around us. And changing streets, requires us talking about things, because we, in most places at least, there's for good reasons, a pretty good process that governs how we change our streets. Now, I'm sure you all have had, a couple of conversations at least about changing streets. That's essentially what we're talking about here. In DC, these conversations are happening in every neighborhood. In Alexandria, it seems like every year we have at least one knockout, bang out fight over a street and possibly changing it. Seminary Road was the last one. I don't know if you were around for that one, but it wasn't fun. People get animated. And obviously there's a lot of reasons for it, but if you're just talking with, think about your neighbor down the block who isn't steeped, who doesn't ride a bike per se. Their typical experience is hopping in the car every day to get to work. They think about parking, they think about traffic. When they hear someone coming down with safe streets, they're often quite a bit resistant to it. One reason is just think about, how TV and the news talks about streets. It's not about the joys of getting around your neighborhood and being able to walk to all of the things that you need around you, or feeling the wind in your hair. It's about traffic, and it's about delays and accidents and construction and toll roads and traffic fines and parking tickets. It's all defined by these negatives, and often by costs or inconveniences. These are the assumptions, or these are sort of the associations that we're steeped in. As someone mentioned already, there's also this pervasive culture of streets are for cars. And that came not by accident. It came from five or more decades of planning and incentives to change our cities and our downtowns and our suburbs to be more optimized to move lots of cars quickly, from the federal government all the way down to the locals. You even have, car makers created this notion of a jaywalker. There was a time when, as Jason mentioned, our streets used to be teeming with people walking and bicycling and horses and all of that. So we've already changed substantially the idea of what streets are for or who they're for. We can change it back, but it's going to take some work. And then, change is hard. I forget who first said it, but the only thing that people hate worse than the way things are is changing it. Change is really, really hard. And when we're looking around at the status quo, most streets are not very safe for most people. We're talking about change. Are there any other thoughts of like why these conversations are hard? Y'all can feel free to jump in.
I think at least from what I've experienced here in Pittsburgh, I feel like a lot of the conversations are hard because um, a lot of the residents don't feel like they've been included in the process. And because that's something that we also struggle with, it's, you know, it's also hard to like have a conversation when you feel like you weren't included.
Absolutely. Yeah. The question of who are streets for, will they for sure better be for me? And if things are changing without consulting me or without consulting people like me, then that's surely a problem. Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. Great. So we know these conversations are hard, you know, but we also know that it's really important to find ways to talk with each other about safe streets. It's just, it shouldn't be seen as optional. Just to load on another layer, you know, unsafe streets mean literally unacceptable carnage, trauma, and loss that very quickly reverberates throughout a community. Nationally, driver fatalities from crashes may be coming down thanks to advancements in like safer cars, but the opposite is happening with pedestrians. Pedestrian fatalities continue to rise, especially in cities. Also, we need to get better at this because sticking with the system that we have today means sticking with a system where transportation inequity is baked in. You know, we know that lower income communities and communities of color, they typically have lower car ownership, higher transit dependence, and actually that's a really loaded term, but this sort of the planning term that's used. Higher transit dependence, disproportionate pedestrian crashes, higher speeds, you know, more injuries, fatalities, worse health outcomes, worse access to jobs, all of these things, we can't accept that. So, but they're all wrapped up in safe streets. And as you mentioned, you know, we need to be better about talking about safe streets because we need to convince people. We can't just summarily decide to change our streets to work different ways. Because first off, someone later could just come back and switch them back. But more importantly, because we live in communities that should be inclusive, where everybody should feel comfortable and included. So we really need to be getting better about talking about safe streets in an inclusive way, and that starts with, well, it starts with conversations. Before we get too much into just like how those conversations happen, wanted to quickly touch on like what is a safe street? What does it look like? And I think a good shorthand is a safe street is a complete street, or complete streets are safe streets. This is a very technical definition over here on the left, but a complete street is one that's designed, operated, and maintained to accommodate safe and convenient access and mobility. And the important thing, for all users of that transportation system. That's people walking, biking, using transit, driving, emergency responders, people of all ages and abilities. It's a mouthful, but I think one way to make sure that the street, you know, this should be the goal. Every time that a construction project tears up a street, we should have the goal to return it as a complete street, one that works for everyone. Many cities have like complete streets policies, but in practice, this is not the rule. And of course, over here on the right, like this is what you get. This is an artist's rendition of what things look like today in many communities. Big chasms where people walking or perhaps people biking are relegated to just very narrow little walkways. So safe street, complete streets are safe streets. important to note that you don't have to know what a complete street is to understand it. So on to talking about some things. Just a few tips, and then we're gonna roll up our sleeves and try to get into it. So some tips for productive conversations. And this is not exhaustive, and I actually would love some input from y'all as we go. But let's start with these. So first off, people-centered language. This is a pretty academic concept, but in practice, it gets very, very simple. You may have noticed there that as I was reading through the thing, the slide before, instead of talking about pedestrians and bicyclists and transit users and drivers, I switched over to talking about people who bike or people who walk, folks riding the bus, people walking. So people-centered language, we often talk about, people who bike instead of bikers. I think a really clear illustration of this is, I want you all to take a moment and think about the two words crash and accident, and the sort of the different connotations, associations you might have with those. Take a moment there, and then I'd love to hear if anyone has a clear association with either. Anything jump out?
Oh, accident always sounds like unavoidable, not my fault, could have happened to anybody. Nothing I could do about it. It's an act of God kind of thing.
Absolutely. Nobody was in control of this. It just happened. It completely takes the agency out of it. Which is to say that it certainly, an accident wasn't a car crash being an accident. It wasn't the fault of the person driving. It wasn't the fault of maybe the person walking who got hit walking across the road. It certainly wasn't the fault of the engineer who designed the road, or the planner or the engineer who stamped the design on that road, or the people who built it, or the people who decided that should be funded and built that way. Completely takes the agency out of it. And it also makes it really hard to like see the person in that interaction. This is sort of the standard news speak talking about traffic crashes is, so-and-so was hit by a car. It's just a thing that happened. You can't examine it. So something in sort of if there is such a thing as a safe streets movement, you may notice that many folks have started talking about traffic crashes instead of accidents. And so obviously this goes into the very words that we talk about people as well. People who bike, not bikers, which I think you all can understand. It's somebody walking. It's not a pedestrian. I certainly don't think of myself as a pedestrian. So as you're talking through, really talking with anyone, try to get the habit. Try to practice, talking about people who bike, or someone biking, a family biking.
At work, we had a discussion about bicycling or cyclists versus bikers, and I guess the bikers has a motorcycle connotation. So at my work anyway, they think people ride motorcycles when they bike. So I don't know, but that for me, I see that as a big difference. I try to use cyclists or bicycling when I can.
Absolutely. Also, I'm curious, has anyone ever had an interaction with somebody where suddenly they discovered that you're a bicyclist? Maybe talking with a coworker and suddenly, it dawns on them like, oh, you're a biker. And suddenly I know that I've had this happen with other friends or family members, and it kind of dawns on them like, oh, you're one of those crazy people. You're one of those hipsters. instead of like, oh, you're my nephew. You're a person trying to get around. So people-centered language when you can. Again, doesn't have to be academic. Another thing that is really helpful is we often talk a lot about the thing that we're trying to change on a street. So on Seminary Road, we're going to do a road diet, take away a driving lane, and we're going to add some bike lanes. And that's going to make the streets safer for everybody. But framing it that way, we actually lose sight of all the other people who benefit and will continue using that road. So it's important that, when we talk about Safe Streets projects, make it clear who it's for. Seminary Road actually made it a whole lot safer to walk on that street, a whole lot safer to get to and from the bus stop. Sure, it benefited bicyclists, but it also in some cases helped traffic flow smoother. And it opens up a space for other people to use too. So focus on all the benefits, not just the the main event. A bike lane, in fact, brings tons and tons of benefits for lots and lots of people. And sometimes it's just a matter of iterating that and reiterating that. I think another thing that's really helpful is to focus on relatable challenges. And make it personal. So it's not just we want to add bike lanes to this road. Give context of why. Why might you need sidewalks on a road? What challenge is that trying to fix? And when you can, try to put the person in the shoes of the person walking or biking along the street. Maybe there's half a mile between two stoplights and there's always somebody jaywalking. But in fact, they're doing that because they have a good reason to. It's possible the person you're talking to has never considered what it's like to walk along a street and need to cross it. Focusing on challenges, I think is good because these are things that can be fixed. A challenge is a thing that probably should be fixed. And if you can find a way of putting somebody in the shoes of the person experiencing that challenge, all for the better. Now, finally, this is sort of the highlight or the thing to highlight. Storytelling is one of the best ways to help people relate to each other. Stories are personal. This isn't about somebody out there in the world. But you can relate it to your own experience. When I say storytelling, I'm talking about, talk about your experience on the street. Again, find those relatable challenges. And maybe even talk about how you feel. When I'm biking down this street, the way that it works today, very often I'm passed very quickly by people driving quickly. And that makes me feel really scared. And it makes me feel like I don't want to continue biking on this street, but I don't have many better choices. Anytime you're sharing or telling a story, especially when you're sharing your feelings, listening is a critical part. Take a step back, allow them to share something as well. And most critically, don't be defensive, listen. So those are some very quick tips. I have a few tips on things to sort of be cautious of, but curious if y'all have any quick thoughts. Or questions on those. Okay, great. Let's move on. Oh, sorry, there was one more. I think another thing is, anytime that you're having a conversation with somebody about safe streets, it's important to set realistic goals. Don't expect to convince someone that this project for adding protected bike lanes to a particular street in their neighborhood that might have trade-offs. Don't expect that they're going to be on your side immediately. but you can expect that if you approach it, with humility and with empathy, that maybe they can understand a little more of your perspective. Maybe they can put a face to that biker who antagonized, who they often think of as an antagonist. Starts to build a relationship. So set realistic goals. You're not going to convince everybody in one conversation, but you can make steps. Okay, some things to avoid. While this picture to the right might look like everybody's dream, it might not be for everybody. A few things to keep an eye out. Again, language is really specific and carries different meanings. Something like slow down traffic. Somebody who typically experiences a street by riding a bike or walking might see this as an unequivocal good. Of course, everybody wants to slow down traffic. That is the goal, right? Slower streets are more pleasant. Obviously, that's not the case. So you can't just throw out something like this. Another example, someone might very flippantly throw out, oh, this is car culture is run amok, is running rampant. It's often a very value-based statement, and will very quickly turn the tenor of your conversation. There are probably dozens of these things, but I wanted to ask if y'all had ever had the experience of being, having a conversation, you throw out a term, and suddenly it completely changes your conversation. Anyone had that experience?
Definitely. It just kind of alienates things, and it's not very, unless unless I was talking to all of you, where people are familiar, it makes a person then feel even more out of it.
Absolutely. Blows up any consensus that you might have had, any rapport that you might have had with that person, because suddenly maybe you've actually shared what you really think, but it puts highlights in yellow, bright colors, the divide between you and your values, and it makes it really hard to bridge that. A solution to this, really just focus on the commonalities that you think you might have with that person. Maybe eventually you can get to talk about what are appropriate speeds for a street, but if you start at slow down traffic, you're probably never going to get to a productive conversation on, maybe that speeding is a bad thing. At all costs, we want to keep people from being on the defensive, because that rarely puts people in a position to learn. Or this brings us to this one. Really important to check your ego. Always be mindful of how you are interacting with a person, and whether you're likely to be defensive. Conversations with people about safe streets where you're trying to convince them to come on your side, potentially support a project, potentially oppose it less. The goal is not to win. It's not to be right. It's not to be most correct. It's to build connections and build understanding. So really, you may not always be in a good place to have these conversations. Be in tune with where you are. Okay, there we go. It's really not about winning. We want to build empathy. We want to build understanding, because by winning, we may change the streets, we may change the layout, we may change, make it more accessible for people. But in any community, people are the people who lived there before, ideally, should be living there into the future. So yeah, it's not necessarily about winning. And okay, there we go. Any other big things to avoid that you all have seen? Any mistakes y'all have seen someone else make that shut down conversations?
Well, it's an easy one, but I shouldn't use gender, but I do. So having a conversation with "ma'am, how are you?" or something is not a good thing, especially if it's not a man. So trying to be more neutral about that, especially say with people being binary and other things. I'm trying to make sure I don't use pronouns like that. That really can stop a conversation, make it very awkward.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think
Any other?
you already mentioned it, but maybe just saying it a different way is like just dismissing what people have said is like not valuable in a conversation. I've definitely seen people, on both sides just kind of dismissing what the other person is saying and you can just tell they're not even listening at a certain point.
Sure. My favorite is it's almost a running trope, but a bike advocate whose favorite phrase is "well, actually," it's a sure sign that you're not listening when you come back with, "well, actually, I have a report here with data that shows that that's not the case." While those can be helpful, while facts can be helpful, quite often things are not about facts. And it's much more like respect goes a whole huge long way. You can respectfully disagree with somebody and still find a happy medium or a middle ground that's at least an improvement over the last step. Absolutely. Cool. So with respect to time, I want to, the best way to sort of get into these things is to practice it. And I think the more conversations we can have, the better. Wanna really quickly partner everyone up. Let's see, how many folks do we have? We have an even 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'll join somebody. We're gonna do a little bit of role playing here real quick. So we're going to go into some breakout rooms. So you'll be there just with a person. And basically, we're going to take turns. Think about a street that you know well. Maybe you walk down it every day, or bike down it every day, or drive down it every day. But there's something that you would like to change to make it safer and more accessible for walking and biking. Let's make it a specific change. Now, one of you is going to sort of start we're imagining that we're having a conversation with a neighbor who may live nearby, but who does not walk or bike or get around the same way that you do. Perhaps they only experience it by car, where they're driving through it or parking. So we're going to try to have sort of a quick steered conversation towards just trying to get, we're going to share a little bit of why we want to change it. And we're, and the other person's going to sort of play that role. Just to get have some fun with this. Let's try to be reasonable. Don't take the role play too real. Cool. Well, I think the lesson here is that every conversation is different. This is a thing that, we need to practice. You get better with practice, it gets more fluid and fluent. And also that, no one conversation is gonna completely convince someone or get them on your side. But that these conversations are easier to have when you do know your neighbors and have talked about these things. So yeah, let that be a lesson to you and get out there and try it. Since I don't want to keep you all too long, just wanted to quickly highlight some of the future trainings that we're going to do next week and the weeks after. Each of these are Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Some will be shorter than others, but none more than an hour. And I want to try to keep to that promise. Next week is all about sort of making the argument for a project, whether it's protected bike lane or additional sidewalk or or what have you. And this will be specifically about like the tools that we can use to make great pictures, to gather potentially convincing data. So some of the different, tools of argument that we can use. We'll dive next week. After that is all about tactics. What are some fun and easy ways that you can sort of get your idea out, convince people, and show decision makers that that you actually come with a substantial group of people. For a DC specific thing, working with advisory neighborhood commissions, for better or worse, they have a lot of authority on what happens on streets. Often it's better, often it's worse. And so it's good to have a sense of how they work and how the public or advocates can work with them. The who decides is all about sort of decision makers and process, and what processes that perhaps your city might use to decide on how to move forward with a safe street project. Planning to win is all about sort of the higher level planning you can do around a campaign to change a street, mapping out power for decision makers and things like that. We have them all up on the website at wapa.org/fun, and would love for y'all to join. This was a little more free flowing today. I think you'll get a little more slide deck the next ones, but definitely time for folks to chat and work through activities, especially next week. So I guess with that, just want to thank you all for coming. If there are any questions that folks might have, or on this topic or any other topic, I'm happy to stick around for a bit. But thanks so much for coming.